In this video, we're going to talk about some of the top reasons why maybe you want to reconsider your move to the Oregon coast.
Wow, it's amazing how many gray hairs I have just after 2 years. In this video, we're going to take a look back at our most popular video, well over 100,000 views, talking about the 11 reasons why maybe you should reconsider moving to the Oregon coast. We're going to look at all 11 points and talk about maybe some new insights and why maybe these aren't that much of a deterrent after all, and also offer some solutions as well, where if this is your biggest concern, here's maybe what you could do about it. So if you want to learn more about some of the things that make the Oregon coast not all that desirable as a place to live, stay tuned to learn more. Hey, what's up everybody? This is Clem from the Oregon relocation team coming to you from the Oregon coast. And in this video, we're going to look back at the 11 reasons why maybe you should reconsider moving to the Oregon coast. Now, a lot of people move to the Oregon coast for the obvious reasons. It is a beautiful area. The landscape, of course, you have the ocean and the beaches. There's some peace and quiet and tranquility to that. A lot of people move to the Oregon coast to get milder weather. A lot of people move here for just a slower pace of life. The reasons why people move to the Oregon coast are pretty obvious, pretty clear cut, but I still think that people can really underestimate how crummy the weather can be, how small these towns really are, and how isolated the Oregon coast is as well. So we're going to touch on those points in this video. Now, our goal is to give people a realistic outlook on what it's actually going to be like living at the Oregon coast. We don't want to sugarcoat things. I think first and foremost, especially because we work with so many people who are relocating to the Oregon coast from out of state. And they're coming from an area that is, in a lot of cases, night and day different from what life is like on the Oregon coast, what the climate's like on the Oregon coast, the topography. Of course, living near the ocean is a whole thing in and of itself. So again, we really want to make sure that people have a clear understanding of what they're getting themselves into before we even jump into talking about what towns you should be looking in and what the real estate market is like. I mean, that's what we do. We help people relocate to the Oregon coast all day long. That's our job. But, we really do feel a responsibility to paint a very clear picture as to, again, what it's going to be like. And I think that resonates with people. It's no surprise that our most popular video has been this video talking about why you should stay away. So again, we're going to look back at some of these points, hopefully provide some new insights, and again, talk about maybe some solutions, areas that you could either avoid or areas that you should focus on, or things that you can do overall to kind of custom tailor your experience living on the Oregon coast to what you're actually envisioning. Now, if this is your first time to the channel, or you've been here and you haven't already and you want to get more videos like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the little bell to get notified every time we drop a new video. And we've helped so many people relocate to Oregon and move to the Oregon coast. And as real estate professionals, we absolutely love to help with that process. So if that's you, give us a call, send us a text, shoot us an email, or click the link down below in the description of the video. Schedule a Zoom call with us. We can talk all about it.
Let's get into it. Let's get started. Number one on the list is everything closes early.
Okay, so this is a point that I think is just something that's good to know. It's maybe not the biggest deterrent, and it's probably not that big of a deal to most people, but it's something that you need to understand. So when you find a landing spot, you understand what's around you so you can plan ahead. I think there's going to be towns where this isn't as accentuated as much, and for sure, a lot of this is really catered to tourism, in that the businesses that are very seasonal and might close early a lot of times, or might only be open a couple days a week. A lot of these businesses are going to be businesses that are catered to tourism, whether that is restaurants, which can be less convenient as a local, but things like galleries and shops, they're not always open. So, if you want to go out and about and go shopping, for example, you're not going to be able to necessarily do it every day. And it might be something, again, where, it's closing early. For sure, this is going to be a bigger deal in a smaller town. So even if you live in town next to kind of the downtown area, in a smaller town, you will definitely be more affected by seasonal hours and businesses closing early. But if you live in a larger town, a town of, 10 10,000 plus people. Those, that's going to be Astoria. The Seaside area, the Tillamook area, those are closer to 6,000, 7,000 people. But then Lincoln City, Newport are about 10,000 people. Florence is about 10,000 people. Coos Bay, North Bend, about 25,000 people. And then all the way down to Brookings, Harbor. It's going to be about 10,000 people there as well. If you're in those towns, the quote unquote larger towns on the Oregon coast, you're not going to be running into as much, inconvenient hours for local businesses. Another thing too is like if you live in a smaller town or village, you'll probably just be getting to the next largest town anyway for quite a bit of things, whether that be day-to-day needs like shopping, groceries, etc., or for entertainment. So if you lived in like Otter Rock, for example, you're just going to drive down to Newport 20 minutes. If you live in Nescoin, you're just going to drive down to Lincoln City 20 minutes. And there are areas that are going to feel a lot more isolated where it's not going to be nearly as convenient to get to that next largest town. So an area like Port Orford, for example, you are really pretty isolated. I mean, Bannon is quite a ways north. It might be like 40 minutes. And then getting down to Gold Beach, similarly, 45 minutes, 50 minutes, something like that. So it's not like in that like 15, 20, 25-minute window where most smaller towns are on the Oregon coast. Pacific City, too, is going to be pretty isolated. Pacific City, you can get down to Lincoln City in about 30 minutes, or you can get up to Tillamook in about 30 minutes, but it's not going to be super convenient in terms of your day-to-day needs. And these are smaller towns, like Pacific City, Port Orford, where, like one grocery store in town, a lot of stuff is going to be seasonal hours and close early. So these are things that just you at least want to have on your radar, when you're breaking down different areas, and especially when you start to search for a home, you might see the perfect home, but we really need to evaluate what's there on your doorstep and how convenient or inconvenient it's going to be when you look at especially a lot of these businesses on the Oregon coast having limited or seasonal hours.
Okay, next on the list is there's no nightlife.
So this one is just kind of in the same breath, right? But this is more geared toward the entertainment aspect of things. Nightlife on the Oregon coast isn't like clubs and a vibrant bar district or anything like that. And I don't think anybody expects that or necessarily wants that who is moving to the Oregon coast, at least the folks that we talk to all the time and the folks that we help move to the area. So again, this is more geared toward just entertainment in general. So if you want to go grab dinner, maybe you want to go grab drinks, or go shopping, again, especially kind of into the evening, that's not going to be something that you're going to have readily available like you would in a larger, more populated area with in a city with a downtown area, for example. So that kind of nightlife, quote unquote, type entertainment is really, really going to be limited. So, get used to the nights in, hit the record player, pour some wine, make some drinks at home, or whatever you like to do, because that's probably going to be a much more realistic option. But I think, again, like if you are like most people that we work with, these aspects are really kind of a plus. Or at least a trade-off where you know what you're getting into because you are moving to a place where it's just a much slower pace of life, much more laid back, and you do give up some of these luxuries that at least some people might want or enjoy, or conveniences in some case, with some of the seasonal hours. So I think this is something where I think for most people it's like, who cares? But at the same time, I have talked to a lot of people that say they don't necessarily need the nightlife or all the entertainment. They're not going to be hitting the town all the time, but they do like the energy of having that around. And again, that's not something you're going to find really anywhere on the Oregon coast. I think for these first two categories, seasonal hours, some of the things you get with smaller towns that are, again, especially that are going to be more seasonal, or kind of the lack of like a lot of the entertainment or nightlife. So if these are things that you want to have at least in some close proximity, maybe even something you want to do, once or twice a year, whatever it may be, and you at least want to have some options on the table, you just want to look toward those larger, more populated areas, and you'll have more options. So that would really be the only solution, is just gravitate more toward the more populated areas.
Okay, next on the list is the weather. Rain, go away. Well, not necessarily.
So for this one, you've probably heard us go on and on if you've watched even a few of our videos about this point. And this is one that even still, anybody that we engage with, I try to say, hey, look, there is like 2 or 3 times the precipitation that you'll get on the Oregon coast compared to where you are coming from. Even if you're coming from somewhere else in the Pacific Northwest, Seattle or Portland, you're going to get potentially 50% more inches of precipitation annually at the Oregon coast than you would even in like Portland, or perhaps double. So again, I mean, you can see the weather, you can go there for a few days, experience it, but to live and kind of breathe, this different climate is definitely, it's going to be a shock potentially for a lot of people, but it's at least going to be vastly different. So it's like, hey, buckle up. Like, this is going to be a change. We're talking, change of wardrobe. We're talking, change how you might engage with, being outside. And I think a lot of it will come down to how quickly you can become acclimated, because it will become getting acclimated again, no matter where you're coming from. But a lot of people are escaping climates that are super hot. We get a lot of people that are moving from, whether it's California or Texas or Arizona, other parts of the country where it gets so hot it is just unbearable. And you definitely won't get that on the Oregon coast. I think one thing on the Oregon coast in terms of weather that people really like is that it is very mild. I mean, you're living in between 40 and 60 degrees for the entire year, and it can get a little bit colder, and it can for sure get warmer in the summer, and you get actually some really nice pleasant weather and not a ton of precipitation in the summer. So it's not all bad by any stretch of the imagination. And again, it really is pretty mild, but it's also unlike anywhere else. Some of the feedback we get from people that we helped move a year ago or 2 or 3 years ago, just kind of following up with clients over the years, a lot of people say it's exactly what they anticipated and they love it. And we've also heard a lot of people say this is a serious change and it's taking some time to get used to. We also see like a lot of homes that hit the market that sold a year ago in some cases, but 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. And, usually when you see a house that is for sale pretty quickly after being, purchased previously, the first question is like, well, why is the seller moving? You just want to make sure that there's nothing wrong with it. That can be a little bit of a red flag, but probably the most common thing I hear for homes up and down the Oregon coast is that, these folks moved from this place and they just couldn't take the rain or they couldn't take the weather. So just kind of beware that is something that is at least a possibility, that you could move here and say, it's not for me.
Okay, moving on. Next on the list, these are small towns.
All right, so this point is different from the earlier points about stuff closing early and not having as much of like the urban entertainment, in that, small towns have a different dynamic socially and just how things operate, whether that is how the people engage with the city itself, city government, how things run, services, etc. But again, also just kind of socially and how people engage and interact. And I think for the most part, anybody moving to the Oregon coast understands that these are small towns and that they want to be in a small town environment. One thing to talk about too is, why aren't these towns growing? A lot of towns on the Oregon coast have experienced some boom at some time, but it hasn't in a long time. No town has experienced, 10, 15, 20% population growth over a short period of time. And, I think there's 2 big reasons for that. It's very transient, in part because probably some of what I was talking about, where it's like a lot of people move to the Oregon coast and they're really excited about being there, but then they're there for a while and just say, it's not for me. These are also towns where a lot of people that buy houses are buying second homes or vacation homes or investment properties to do Airbnb and short-term rentals and things like that. So you have this whole market segment of people that buy homes at the Oregon coast that don't actually live there for most of the year. So the population of the Oregon coast is pretty transient. And it's not like people aren't moving there. And I think overall you're seeing some level of population growth, but there's a lot of people that are moving away for various reasons too. Another thing is that the economy on the Oregon coast isn't great. We've talked about that in other videos. I'll touch more on that later in this video. But I think that's another reason, is just there's not really any industry and there's not a lot of population growth in terms of people moving in for different types of jobs. So for a ton of people that we work with moving to the Oregon coast, I have found a pretty consistent thread or theme with at least the majority of people where they are coming from a small town already. So this is kind of a lifestyle, way of life, and dynamic that they are used to and that they are seeking. Or they've lived in a small town at some point in their life, whether it's where they grew up or spent some time at some point over the years, and they know what they're getting into. And again, the social dynamics are going to be a lot different from a larger, more populated area. So, everybody kind of knows everybody. Everybody's maybe in each other's business a little bit. Not if you don't want to be necessarily, but if you are involved in social circles and things like that, word gets around quicker. It's probably a little more gossipy than again, a larger, more populated area. I think another aspect to it too, especially the way the Oregon coast, it's not like these are just small towns, but they are isolated too, having to get up and over the coastal range to get to the I-5 corridor in Oregon, where most of the population in Oregon is. So to get to the larger towns, it's not super easy. I mean, you could be an hour at the absolute quickest getting to like Eugene from Florence, or to Portland, or even like Hillsborough from, say, Tillamook. But I think because these are isolated places and small towns, people can get maybe a little bit island fever to some degree. The amenities can be lacking, amenities, services, things like that, and that's just like sidewalks or city parks or, you name it down the line. Some things that you maybe have in a place that you're coming from, you might not find as much of, again, just because these are smaller towns and less developed overall. And again, most of the folks we talk to, regardless of where they're coming from, they don't even want to be in town a lot of the times. They want to be off the beaten path a little bit. So I think a lot of people that are moving to an area like this are seeking this type of environment. So maybe that's speaking to you specifically, but if you wanted to be off the beaten path and in a rural setting, that's pretty easy to do up and down the Oregon coast. Or if you wanted to be in town, most of the towns on the Oregon coast are pretty dense. So you can get kind of an experience where you're really living amongst people, and although they're not large towns, especially with the tourism aspect of things, it can be bustling, and you can walk to town and almost have a little bit more of an urban experience on a much smaller scale. I think for most people, one way or another, they're like, I don't care. I just want a home with an ocean view. I want to be able to walk to the beach or get to the beach super quickly. And where I'm coming from, I can't get a home for less than $2 million. So I want to be at the ocean. Get me to the Oregon coast, because you can find some relative affordability.
Okay, next on the list is homes get battered by the weather.
This is another point that we really try to hammer home with people. I mean, again, we talk about the weather all the time, and after we get done talking about the weather with people, we talk about the effect that has on actual houses at the Oregon coast. And there are some serious setbacks, whether it's just, the time, the resources that it takes, and when you look at home maintenance, routine maintenance, but also replacing roofs more often, HVAC systems, you name it. Another thing too is that because these are smaller towns, you will be limited in terms of how many service providers are out there who can help with these various projects that you might need. So if you are handy and can do some of this stuff yourself, that can really go a long way. I mean, it could really serve you moving to the area. But I've found that a lot of people, even if they have kind of the skill, the knowledge, etc., to do some of the work that might be needed, whether it is maintenance related or periodic repairs, replacements, etc., they don't necessarily want to do it themselves all the time. And it's not like you can't find contractors at the Oregon coast, even if you are in the smallest, most isolated town. Again, that next town north or south that has more people, you're going to be able to find somebody who can come do a job for you. Or you can find people to come from larger towns up and down the I-5 corridor. So if you're in Lincoln City, you can get folks coming out from Salem, Newport. You can get people coming from Corvallis, really all the northern Oregon coast, Clatsop County, Tillamook County. You can get people coming out from Portland, Eugene to Florence, etc. Every region and most towns on the Oregon coast have a bigger, let's say, city, whether it's Portland, the biggest city, or kind of a mid-sized city or big town that's a straight shot east from it. So that is an option, but especially for local contractors, if you can find one, which again, it's not impossible by any means, they're probably pretty backed up. They tend to get pretty busy. So especially if you're getting into a circumstance where you have like an emergency, that can really be a problem, as far as actually getting somebody out, being able to get on their calendar in short order. Something we didn't touch on in the previous video that we try to impress on people is not only does this make owning a home on the Oregon coast more difficult, more of a challenge, you're much more involved, much more hands-on. Again, when you're looking at the maintenance stuff in particular, it also makes a home search more difficult too, because there are so many homes on the Oregon coast that have pretty extreme deferred maintenance. And even when you get into homes that, the seller has been a pretty good steward, there's going to be something. And there's going to be something related to deferred maintenance that's been caused by, whether it's direct ocean frontage where you get the salty air and the wind and you really just kind of get battered. But even if you're on the east side of the highway, you're in an area that has so much more moisture than just about anywhere, and a home's number one enemy is moisture. Kind of at every level. So this is something where, again, we could get a list of a dozen homes that look like viable options. When we go out and tour homes, it's not uncommon for half of those homes, more than half of those homes to, be good options overall, but it's like what you see in the photos versus some of the things that you can start picking out touring in person. You definitely don't get a full clear picture, just looking at the listing online.
Okay, next on the list, this is one we get asked about a lot, is tsunamis.
I think this comes down to what somebody's tolerance is for living amongst the threat of natural disaster. And in this part of the country, we don't deal with hurricanes, or we don't deal with tornadoes. We deal with wildfires, but not really on the coastal range or not in coastal communities. Earthquakes can happen, but they're pretty infrequent, pretty rare in terms of anything that does any significant damage. So it's something that, it's like everybody knows that there's this big one that could happen at some point. Potentially, even I think in the next 50 years, there's like a 20-30% chance, something like that, of the big one happening, and that being like an earthquake that's over maybe 7.5 magnitude, something like that, up to 9 plus, that basically could completely destroy every coastal community up and down the Oregon coast. So the threat is there, one way or another, whether it's 0.1% chance or a 99% chance, anything in between. The further you extend out in the future, the greater the chances get. So, with every passing year, the greater the chances get for this to potentially happen. Because it could also just as likely be hundreds of years in the future, maybe thousands of years, I'm not sure, but well past any of our lifetimes. And, the magnitude of the big one is unknown. Exactly what the damage would be is unknown. How big a tsunami would be, and again, just how devastating it could be, isn't quite known. Although there are projections, there is plenty of research that you can look up, and I definitely encourage people to do so.
Okay, next on the list is the lack of big city amenities.
So this touches on a few points that we've talked about already. Stuff closing early, businesses being seasonal, the entertainment can be lacking relative to at least what you've maybe enjoyed in your life up to this point. The fact that these are smaller towns and the social dynamics are going to be different. And with this one, it's like public services, community centers, sidewalks, parks. I touched on that a little bit, but gyms and lap pools. I've had so many people that want a lap pool that they can go to swim in, and there's a few towns that have them, and there's a lot that don't too. So there really are some things where you might be looking at potentially making a sacrifice. Healthcare is a big one. Restaurants, shopping, public transportation. It's not like these things are completely non-existent or completely non-functional, but I would say there's probably something that you would want or need at some point, or maybe at some regular interval, that wouldn't be there. Where you would have to drive 90 minutes to get to it. And it's not necessarily the case where it's in the next largest town, north or south either, like I was talking about. I mean, you can get the basic stuff, even if it's just getting to a Safeway, or a big grocery store or something like that. But for example, I talked to a client a couple of months ago who was in his first year living on the Oregon coast, and he couldn't find a primary care physician, ended up having to get one 90 minutes away. And, that is an enormous inconvenience. And so many people that we work with are 55 plus, 60 plus, 70 plus, where healthcare becomes a bigger and bigger factor as far as needing to have that, in some close proximity. So, again, I wouldn't say this so far as to completely scare somebody away, but this is something where, if you're looking at specific towns, look at the healthcare providers that are there. Look at whether or not, the insurance that you have, it's something that you can use, or the specialists that you might need are there, because you don't want to get so far as to move to a place and be blindsided by the lack of, again, especially something like healthcare, but anything else, as far as hobbies, things that you do for just, whatever it is, lifestyle, exercise down the line.
Okay, next on the list, and this is a big one that people ask us about too, is there are so many tourists on the Oregon coast.
The name of the game on the Oregon coast is tourism. Every town on the Oregon coast is filled with people staying there for the weekend, staying for the week, whatever it may be. People drive out from everywhere to go to the beaches, even if it's just for the day. So a big factor, a big part of life on the Oregon coast, regardless of where you are, is tourists coming in and out of town. In some places, it's going to be more pronounced than others, for sure. But it's not necessarily the case where, a bigger town has more. I think in a lot of ways, a smaller town, some of these coastal villages in particular, because they're so small, and in a lot of ways, they're pretty dense, but because they're so small, when you get a ton of tourists coming in, it's actually, you can feel it more. It feels more congested, and it feels that much more dense because of all the people that are coming in compared to the times of year when they're not there as often. Although tourism on the Oregon coast is a year-round thing. A lot of a lot of that is because the weather is so mild. You could have freezing temperatures in the valley in Western Oregon, and you can get people driving out to the coast, to actually get 10 degrees warmer in some cases. The larger towns are going to have a higher volume of tourism for sure. Astoria, Lincoln City, Newport, Seaside, of course. Seaside maybe tops them all, but Florence. All of the larger towns are going to have people coming in for vacation, but these larger towns also have other pockets of town or neighborhoods where you can escape it. And some of the smaller towns and villages don't really have that so much. Like Manzanita, for example. It's a great little town, really heavy on tourism. But it's a pretty small, dense little town, and you're not really going to be able to get away from the tourism element of things like you would be in a town like Lincoln City, for example, that has a ton of especially oceanfront neighborhoods that, have a lot of short-term rentals and things like that. And you have inns and hotels just smattered up and down the coastline. But there's a lot of other neighborhoods too that frankly won't be as desirable for people to come stay in. So, you're just not going to get it nearly as much in certain neighborhoods.
Okay, and next on the list, and this is another thing that we get asked about a lot. It's not something that has, completely been on our radar on a personal level as far as things that we've heard about or have been affected by, but crime and poverty, really crime in particular. A lot of people go on, Reddit, or a lot of people are doing their research online and looking at the Oregon coast as a potential, place to relocate to or buy a second home or vacation home. And crime is something that does come up quite a bit in those searches.
Yeah, so I think crime is a concern anywhere. Even if somebody goes to a place assuming that it's safe, I think a lot of people want some verification, just peace of mind as to whether or not where they're moving to is a safe place to live, especially if they're coming from out of state to an area where they don't spend a ton of time. So obviously a warranted and valid question regardless of where you're moving to. If you look at the Oregon coast, is crime bad? I don't think there's a town or, there's anywhere on the Oregon coast where you would say, don't go there, don't go stay there, don't go live there, whatever it may be, because crime has run so rampant that you have to fear for your life and safety on a regular basis. Now, property crime in particular is something that maybe prevalent's not the right word, but it's something that is definitely, it happens. And there are some towns on the Oregon coast that have a per capita, crime rate that really isn't great. I mean, higher than the national average. And, that's at least a baseline looking at the national average. If you're kind of at or below the national average, I think you can generally assume a place is pretty safe. And most of the towns on the Oregon coast are at or below the national average. Some towns are higher. I think there's a couple things that are really big factors. We'll talk about this in a minute, but the Oregon coast, most towns on the Oregon coast, have relatively depressed economies. There aren't a ton of high-paying jobs. There's not a ton of different industry. There's not this booming economy on the Oregon coast that generally would support more financial stability, which generally, statistically, you're going to find areas that have more financial stability have lower rates of crime. There's definitely a correlation, especially when you look at things like crimes of desperation. But even going a step further, when you look at an area where there is some, higher level of poverty, you're going to get into things like drug use. And from that can stem all sorts of crimes related to drug use, whether that's drug-specific crimes or drug-induced crimes. So I think at some level that's felt everywhere on the Oregon coast, just like it's felt everywhere in the country. But let's not let these tourists off the hook either. You could say at any given point of time on the Oregon coast, there's a ton of tourists staying in town, especially, throughout the summers and the warmer months, kind of Memorial Day through Labor Day, but really year round, every weekend. And people go on vacation, people drink, people let loose a little bit. And I think with that, there's some probably significant percentage of crimes that happen in Oregon coast towns that are committed by people who don't live there. So, don't want to just put this on the locals or the fact that, hey, there is some relative level of poverty and, drug use that goes on, etc. That sucks and that's bad. And of course, that's something that, if it were out of control, you would want to know about it. But I think, because of the nature of these towns being so catered to tourism, you're definitely just going to have some dumb people doing stupid stuff.
All right, next on the list is the lack of jobs.
So basically, the Oregon coast is awesome if you work remotely or if you're retired. And then, of course, there's a ton of localized roles. public sector jobs, teachers and firefighters and police officers and city government and you name it. And then there's a lot of jobs that will support the local economy, like accounting and marketing companies and things like that. But overall, there's not a surplus of professional roles or jobs in these Oregon coast towns. So tourism is the top industry up and down the Oregon coast. So you look at the service industry, restaurants, bartenders. You look at lodging. All the way from property managers down to people who clean vacation homes and everything in between. But really, from what we see, most people we work with probably are just about nearing retirement, or they have retired. So that's obviously, you don't really have to worry about getting a job. And of course, if you wanted to go pick up some hours at the local boutique, you could probably do that. But overall, again, the job market, the economy at the Oregon coast is lacking in a lot of ways. There's not a lot of high-paying jobs. And I think, really one of the things that kind of love it or hate it is the Oregon coast really needs tourism and this outside money coming in, at least in its current form. I think really what the Oregon coast needs is people to be more entrepreneurial and businesses to come in, and hire people and grow. And there is opportunity for that. And I think there is, the workforce is there, to support growing industries, if that ever were to happen. But again, in its current form, to support these towns, tourism, again, really is the biggest thing that these towns revolve around. And so having tourism and this outside money come in, people coming into these communities and spending money is very, very important. One of the things that has led to and continues to exacerbate is unaffordable housing, which is a big problem, where you have home prices that are, or even rents too, that are at an unattainable level for the majority of the population in these towns. That's probably, becoming true in a lot of places, but I think that gap, that separation really is more accentuated and larger in Oregon coast communities. So if I'm going to play the role of helping people relocate to the Oregon coast, which I love to do, that's what I do all day long, I also have to advocate for the towns and these communities themselves. And so, hey, if you're moving to the Oregon coast, if you have the capacity to start a business, hire people, pay good wages, that kind of thing, that's only going to make these Oregon coast towns that much better, help sustain growth, and secure a better future for these communities. But of course, you're not obligated to do that. There's also a lot of people who work in the valley. So, I've had clients that have moved to the Oregon coast, but they have a job in Salem or they have a job in Eugene. And in most cases, they work probably no more than like 4 days a week. That's a commute that could certainly get old. But people do it. And, if you don't mind the drive and if the trade-off makes sense, it's not completely impossible. It's definitely doable to live in a town on the Oregon coast and get over to a larger town on the I-5 corridor for work.
Okay, next and last on the list is housing is scarce.
So yeah, housing is scarce, but the market moves slow. And a lot of what we talked about in the video a couple years ago was how much of a strong seller's market it was, where every house was getting multiple offers and going for 5%, 10% in some cases over the list price, which is just couldn't be a different market from what it is today. So much of that is hinged on interest rates, because interest rates have increased so much. People can't afford to pay 50 grand, 100 grand over the list price, or rather, a lot of people have been taken out of the market, so there's not that much competition, so you don't need to pay over the list price in a lot of cases at all. I mean, a lot of what we've done in the last couple of years, and really the expectation has been to come in under the list price. So we're not seeing a super competitive market. Good houses that are priced well in good areas that have desirable attributes, etc., can be competitive and can be very competitive and go well over the list price. So it's not impossible, but it's certainly not the expectation in this market right now. So even though inventory is still relatively limited, people today have the luxury of patience. At least, if you have to move by a certain date, you at least can start early enough to give enough time to wait for the right house to come along. Now, you don't want to be so patient to where you let a good thing go by necessarily, but that's something that we can kind of gauge and evaluate based on what we're seeing. But again, the point being is you have the luxury today of being able to monitor the market, and when something comes on that looks like a good option, it doesn't mean you have to hop on an airplane like that day to fly out to see it because it's going to get 5 offers, in the next couple of days. So the demand is still there. People are just being more patient. And again, if a really good property hits the market that checks a lot of boxes for a large number of people and it's priced well, that's really the major factor in this market. If it's priced well, where enough people are going to jump on it, it could be competitive. And if rates start to come down, we could start to see more and more competition, and this conversation changes a little bit. But overall, even with interest rates going from 2-3% to 7%, up and over 8% for a while, home values have really actually held pretty steady. We may have lost 5 or 10% in the market, depending on what and where, but compare that to 30-40+% growth in home values over like a 24-month period, which is just insane. A 5%, 10%, receding from that crazy growth over 2020, 2021. Home values are still really quite elevated. So that shows you that the demand is there. Really kind of the case across the country, but that's really held true for the Oregon coast. So we have fewer sellers overall. Again, inventory is still limited, but there's also not a ton of new development, especially, big volume development where you have developments of 30, 40, 50, 100 homes. There's one-off developments, there's new construction going on. You can definitely get new builds on the Oregon coast. You can get custom builds. There's opportunities for that, but more housing is needed for sure. And it's not like more luxury oceanfront villas are needed necessarily either. Really, the Oregon coast needs more affordable housing to cater to local residents. But in general, there is a lack of housing. It's hard to find rentals. It can be hard to find a home, but that's where we come in. So if you are thinking about moving to the Oregon coast, and if you want to talk about the housing market, if you want to talk about any of the points that we touched on in this video, if you want to talk about different towns, different areas, your budget, your timeline, we can really put together a game plan for you. And just give us a call, send us a text, shoot us an email, or click the link down below in the description of the video. Schedule a Zoom call with us. We can talk all about it. If this video is helpful, make sure to hit the like button. That helps us out a lot. If you want to get more videos like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Tap the little bell to get notified every time we drop a new video. As always, we really appreciate you watching. Until next time, we'll talk to you later.